Thomas Harris stared at the smoking remains, a lump forming in his throat. It looked exactly like a child, no bigger than 6 years old. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of his headlamp, illuminating the small, still form amidst the shattered plinth and toppled columns. He tasted ozone, sharp and metallic, clinging to the back of his throat. Guilt, cold and immediate, slammed into him. He'd been too hasty, too eager to reach the central chamber. Some xeno-archaeologist he was, more like a clumsy grave robber. Had he triggered a pressure plate, a sonic emitter? He scrubbed a hand across his grizzled jaw, the stubble scratching against his palm. He'd been so careful, meticulously mapping every corridor, every alcove. But this he hadn't anticipated. A child. Gods, not again. He knelt, the grit of pulverized stone grinding into his knees. The body was small, almost fragile. The limbs were slender, the face almost human, almost. The ears were pointed, tipped with a delicate fringe of what looked like silver cartilage. The skin, a pale lavender, possessed a subtle, almost iridescent sheen, but undeniably childlike. What bothered him most was the condition. The chamber was a ruin, ripped apart by some ancient cataclysm. Yet the body was pristine. No dust, no scratches, no sign of the devastation surrounding it. It was as if it had been placed there gently, moments before he'd stumbled in. His wrist-mounted scanner flickered, picking up faint energy readings emanating from the body. Not thermal, not electrical, something else. Something that hummed just outside the range of his instruments, a subtle dissonance that prickled at the edge of his awareness. He frowned. Impossible. He pulled out his handheld scanner, the familiar weight comforting in his palm. The device whirred to life, bathing the small form in a cool blue light. Childlike physiology confirmed. Height, 0. 7 meters. Weight, 18 kilograms, but the energy signature, that was off the charts. The scanner struggled, its internal processors straining to make sense of the data. Cellular structure, partially recognized, xenogenome, fragmentary matches. It was like looking at something both alien and intimately familiar at the same time, a jarring paradox that made his head ache. Then, a flicker. A faint pulse on the scanner's biomonitor, almost imperceptible but there. The device registered a minute fluctuation in cellular activity, a regenerative process, barely detectable but undeniably present. Microscopic wounds began to close, the edges knitting together with unnatural speed. He leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. The lavender skin, previously dull and lifeless, seemed to be regaining its color. A faint blush crept across the cheeks. He thought he saw it, a subtle shift in the angle of the small, pointed ear. A twitch. He rechecked the energy readings, his fingers trembling slightly as he tapped the screen. The numbers were climbing, slowly but steadily. The humming dissonance was growing stronger, filling the chamber with an almost palpable vibration. A warning flashed across the scanner's display. Unknown biological regeneration DETECTED. Caution advised. The words blinked red against the blue light, stark and ominous. Regeneration levels exceeding known parameters. A synthesized voice echoed from his wrist-mounted AI assistant. Rate of cellular reconstruction. Unprecedented. Thomas held his breath. He could see it now, a faint flutter beneath the translucent eyelids. The child's eyes were moving. A shallow breath, barely audible above the hum of the scanner, escaped the small, parted lips. Another followed, deeper this time. The tiny chest rose and fell, a fragile rhythm in the silence. Thomas stared, his knees going weak. The dust, the ruins, the weight of his past, all faded into insignificance. The child wasn't dead. Not anymore. Thomas, startled by the realization that the child was alive, stumbled back, his boots crunching on the shattered stonework. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of ionized dust and something else, something subtly organic, like overripe fruit on the verge of decay. He blinked, the dim light of his headlamp catching the faint rise and fall of her chest. Cautiously, he approached again, his hand hovering over the pulse rifle slung across his back. but his archaeologist's curiosity warred with ingrained caution. He activated a more comprehensive scan on his wrist-mounted device, overriding the standard safety protocols. A wash of emerald light enveloped Seleni's small form. "Warning," the AI chimed, its voice clipped and precise, "exceeding recommended radiation levels. Tissue damage probable." Thomas ignored it, his focus locked on the reading scrolling across the display. The scanner revealed a riot of biological processes far beyond anything he'd encountered. Cellular structures were rebuilding themselves at impossible speeds, neural pathways reforming with each passing second. The data stream pulsed with complex genetic sequences, hinting at engineering far beyond human comprehension. His AI, a sardonic personality construct named Archimedes, finally caught up. "Fascinating," it drawled, its synthesized voice tinged with amusement. "The genetic data shows a partial match to the Prilorian species, designated progenitor Bellatrix. However, there are significant anomalies. Insertions and deletions suggesting directed evolution, or, shall we say, meddling." Thomas frowned, adjusting the scanner's focus. He noted the energy signature emanating from the body was fluctuating wildly, spiking and dipping erratically. Archimedes' analysis on the energy fluctuations could be a defense mechanism. Or, the AI responded, a regenerative surge, possibly both. It's chaotic, like a poorly tuned engine pushed far beyond its design limits. A low groan, barely audible above the hum of his equipment, emanated from Selene. Her eyes remained closed, but a slight frown wrinkled her brow, the skin around the healing lacerations pulling taut. Thomas rummaged in his portable medical kit, pulling out a hypospray filled with a broad-spectrum analgesic. "Let's see if we can at least ease some of the pain," he muttered, pressing the injector against her arm. The regenerative process accelerated visibly. The needle mark vanished almost instantly, the analgesic flooding her system, and then nothing. "Ineffective," Archimedes stated flatly. "The subject's metabolism is off the charts." The analgesic was broken down into its component molecules within 0.3 seconds. Thomas watched, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. Minute changes flickered across Selene's face, a subtle hardening of her features, a faint tightening around her jaw. It was as if something was solidifying within her, something ancient and resolute. He tried to communicate, cycling through a dozen languages stored in his translator. "Can you hear me? Parlez-vous français? Sprechen Sie Deutsch? Do you understand Prilorian?" He ran through the known dialects, his voice echoing in the ruined chamber. Selene remained unresponsive, her breathing growing more regular, deeper. The air around her seemed to shimmer with an almost imperceptible heat. Then he noticed a small, metallic object clutched tightly in her right hand. It was smooth and obsidian black, shaped like a teardrop. A data storage device, undoubtedly. He gently attempted to pry the device from her grasp, his fingers brushing against her surprisingly strong grip. He met unexpected resistance. Her fingers, though small, were locked around the object with unnatural strength. Suddenly, the object activated. A soft hum filled the air, and a beam of cerulean light shot upwards, projecting a holographic symbol above Selene, a stylized, serpentine dragon coiled around a blazing star. It was an emblem he recognized instantly from the ancient Prilorian texts he translated. The sigil of House Valerius, one of the oldest and most powerful noble houses in the Prilorian Empire. Thomas's breath hitched. Selene was not just a Prilorian. She was someone of significant importance, possibly even royalty. A shrill alarm blared from his equipment, jolting him. "Proximity alert. Unidentified energy source detected," Archimedes announced, his voice permeated with urgency. Thomas whirled around, scanning the chamber. A section of the temple ceiling, previously seamless, had shifted. A grinding sound echoed through the ruins as a hidden panel slid aside, revealing a dark, recessed chamber. Inside, A complex array of deactivated weapons systems glinted in the dim light, their targeting sensors focused precisely on the spot where Selene lay. Plasma cannons, missile launchers, energy disruptors all primed and ready. Thomas stared, his mind racing. The attack on Selene hadn't been random. It was deliberate, calculated, part of a larger, far more sinister plan. Selene's eyes snapped open. Her violet eyes snapped open, unfocused for a heartbeat before locking onto Thomas. Confusion warred with suspicion, a chillingly adult calculation flickering across a face that should have been cherubic. She coughed, a wet, rattling sound, and immediately tried to sit up, a sharp intake of breath betraying the pain lancing through her. Thomas, startled, stammered, "Easy, easy now, just stay still." He hovered, unsure whether to touch her. "I'm Thomas Harris. Xenoarchaeologist, I found you. You were hurt, I'm here to help." The girl Selene ignored his clumsy reassurance. Her gaze was sharp, assessing, missing nothing. "My location," she demanded, the galactic standard precise but filled with a Prylorian accent thick enough to cut with a knife. "You're in an ancient temple," Thomas explained, gesturing vaguely around the chamber. "On a remote planet. I don't know how you got here." He carefully omitted any mention of finding her seemingly lifeless body amidst the rubble. Selene's hand went to her side, feeling for something, before she abruptly cut him off, her attention snagged by the device clutched in her hand. It projected a small, holographic emblem, a stylized, three-winged serpent coiled around a star. The emblem flickered erratically, distorted by static. She cursed under her breath, the word guttural and harsh in Prylorian. "Damaged," she spat, her voice tight with frustration. "The comm is slagged." Thomas, seizing the opportunity to be useful, carefully approached the deactivated weapons system, his fingers itching to analyze its alien design. "If you'll permit me." He initiated a diagnostic scan, the device humming softly as it probed the weapon's internal systems. The results splashed across his screen, a cascade of technical data that made his breath catch in his throat. "These weapons," he began, his voice low with concern, "they're designed to target Prylorian physiology with extreme precision." He dug deeper, his fingers flying across the interface. "And the system was recently activated remotely. The activation signal, it originated from within the temple complex." Selene, ignoring him, struggled to stand. Her regenerative abilities, usually lightning fast, seemed sluggish, hampered by some unknown factor. She swayed, catching herself against a crumbling pillar. Then her eyes narrowed, focusing on a dark alcove he hadn't noticed before. The alcove where the weapons were hidden. A flicker of understanding, cold and sharp, crossed her face. "A trap," she murmured, more to herself than to Thomas. He turned, following her gaze. The pieces clicked into place. "Someone wanted you dead," he said, stating the obvious. "Look, this isn't safe. We need to get out of here, now." Selene, however, was already moving, her focus laser locked on the task at hand. "Help me access the temple's security logs," she demanded, her voice brooking no argument. "I need to know who did this." Thomas hesitated. Getting involved in Prylorian internal affairs was the last thing he wanted, but the thought of the impending retaliation and the potential consequences for humanity spurred him into action. "All right," he sighed, "but we do this fast." While Thomas dove into the archaic system, Selene moved with a purpose that belied her apparent age, her movements fluid and economical. She scanned the immediate area, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow, cataloging exits and potential threats. She found a maintenance hatch hidden behind a tapestry, a narrow passage leading downwards, away from the main entrance. She smirked, realizing that these assassins had made an error in their plans. Back at the terminal, Thomas cursed under his breath. "This system is archaic. I can't believe they're still using this tech." He managed to bypass a firewall, creating a temporary opening. "I've got a window, try this." Selene expertly manipulated the controls he opened, using his access point to her advantage. A holographic display flickered to life, showing grainy footage of the temple's main chamber. "Got it," Thomas announced, his voice grim. The security logs showed a hooded figure planting an energy weapon near the chamber entrance, their face obscured by shadows. "There, that's your attacker." Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the air, followed by the sizzle of energy. A bolt of plasma slammed into the wall beside them, showering them with sparks and dust. "Down!" Thomas yelled, shoving Selene behind the crumbling remains of a statue. They scrambled to their feet and bolted, sprinting through the temple's crumbling corridors. They burst out into the dense forest surrounding the temple, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation. Another shot rang out, this one closer, impacting the ground just meters away. Without hesitation, Selene threw herself in front of Thomas, a searing pain blooming in her chest as the energy bolt struck her. She grunted, using the momentum to shove them both down a steep, overgrown hillside. They tumbled through the undergrowth, branches whipping at their faces, until they landed in a muddy heap at the bottom of the ravine. Selene gasped, clutching her side, her face pale. You shouldn't have done that," Thomas stammered, his voice thick with shock. Selene coughed, spitting blood. "Listen to me," she said, her voice urgent. "We can't stay together, not anymore. You'll only slow me down, but if we're going to ally, meet me at these coordinates." She spat a string of numbers onto his hand. "Don't fail me, Zeno." And with that, she vanished into the dense undergrowth, leaving Thomas alone in the echoing silence of the forest. Pain, a dull, throbbing ache radiated from his left leg, mingling with the metallic tang of blood in his mouth. Thomas blinked, trying to focus. The jungle canopy swam above him, a dizzying kaleidoscope of green. He pushed himself up, wincing as a sharp pain shot through his shoulder. He'd landed hard. He ran a hand over his chest, then his leg, checking for breaks. Nothing felt obviously shattered, just bruised and battered. He spat, clearing the grit from his teeth. "Damn it," he muttered, the word echoing in the humid air. His equipment. That was the priority. He fumbled for his pack, finding it ripped and partially open. The scanner was cracked, its screen flickering erratically. The translator miraculously seemed intact. He clipped it to his belt. He pulled out his sidearm, a standard-issue pulse pistol, and checked the charge. Half depleted. Not ideal. Footsteps. Thomas froze, his senses on high alert. Someone was approaching, crashing through the undergrowth. He scrambled behind a fallen tree, its decaying trunk offering meager cover. He peered through the dense foliage, his heart pounding against his ribs. A figure emerged into the small clearing, clad in sleek black armor, the unmistakable silhouette of a Prilorian. But something was off. There were no markings, no insignias to indicate allegiance. The figure scanned the ground, a weapon held at the ready, a nasty-looking plasma rifle with a wicked bayonet. It was clearly searching for something. Or someone, an assassin, no doubt about it. But who had sent them, and why? Thomas pressed himself against the tree, his mind racing. He needed to get out of here, and fast. He knew this area of the temple ruins relatively well. He could use the network of tunnels and overgrown pathways to his advantage. He waited for the assassin to move on, then slipped silently into the jungle, moving in the opposite direction. He needed to contact his ship. He found a relatively clear spot and pulled out the damaged scanner. After a few minutes of fiddling, he managed to coax a weak signal. He activated the secure comm channel, static, then a garbled voice barely audible above the interference. "Under attack, cannot provide immediate assistance. Repeat, under attack." The signal cut out, damn it all, he was on his own. He remembered something, a hidden cache he'd discovered during his initial survey of the area, a few kilometers to the north. It contained supplies and a modified all-terrain vehicle. It was a long shot, but it was his best option. The jungle was a brutal obstacle course, a tangle of vines, roots, and treacherous ravines. But Thomas pushed on, driven by a desperate need to reach Selene. He navigated by instinct and memory, his archaeologist's knowledge of the ancient pathways proving invaluable. He finally reached the cache, a small, concealed cave hidden behind a waterfall. Inside, he found the ATV, dusty but functional. He quickly loaded it with basic survival gear: rations, water, a medkit. As he fired up the engine, he picked up something on his scanner: encrypted Prilorian communications. They were faint but discernible. He rerouted the signal through his translator, his fingers flying across the controls. The voices were clipped and urgent, speaking in rapid Prilorian. He managed to isolate a few key phrases: high-ranking official, assassination, internal conflict, a plot. A plot to assassinate someone important. This wasn't just about Selene, it was about something bigger, something within the Prilorian Empire itself. He punched in the coordinates Selene had given him, the location of her contact. The ATV lurched forward, tearing through the undergrowth. The coordinates led him to an abandoned research facility, half buried in the jungle. The place reeked of neglect and forgotten experiments. Twisted metal and shattered glass littered the overgrown corridors. He activated his scanner, running a diagnostic. The facility had been used for experimental weapon development, specifically targeting Prilorian biology. The data logs were fragmented, but he could piece together a disturbing picture: research into genetic vulnerabilities, attempts to create targeted viruses, weapons designed to exploit the unique aspects of Prilorian physiology. This predated the attack on Selene. This was a long time coming. A sudden flash of light, the whine of a plasma weapon charging. He whirled around just in time to see the Prilorian assassin emerge from the shadows. The assassin fired. Thomas dove for cover behind a rusted generator, the plasma bolts scorching the air where he'd been standing. He returned fire, his pulse pistol spitting bolts of energy. The assassin was fast, agile, weaving through the debris. The firefight was brief, brutal. Thomas was outgunned, outmaneuvered, but he had one advantage: knowledge. He knew the layout of the facility, the hidden passages, the structural weaknesses. He led the assassin on a chase through the ruins, using the environment to his advantage. Finally, he managed to corner the assassin in a collapsed section of the facility. He disarmed them with a desperate lunge, knocking the plasma rifle from their grasp. He pinned the assassin to the ground, his pistol pressed against their head. "Who sent you?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. The assassin remained silent, their face hidden behind their helmet. Thomas ripped off the helmet, revealing a young Prilorian, their eyes filled with cold purpose. He found a data chip embedded in the assassin's armor. He plugged it into his translator, hoping for answers. The chip contained encrypted information, but he managed to bypass the security protocols. He found what he was looking for: Selene's location. He used the data chip to send a comm signal to Selene, a desperate gamble, a moment of silence. Then, a faint voice, crackling with static. "Thomas, is that you?" "Selene," he said, relief flooding through him. "Where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm injured," she said, her voice weak. "I need your help, but be careful, Thomas. They're coming for me, all of them." "Who's coming for you?" "Everyone," she said. "Factions, loyalists, traitors. They all want me. I'm being pursued." He followed the coordinates from the data chip, his ATV tearing through the jungle. He found her in a small clearing, surrounded by chaos. Two groups of Prilorian soldiers were engaged in a fierce firefight, plasma bolts crisscrossing the air. Selene was huddled behind a fallen log, her face pale, her arm bleeding. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with fear and relief. "Thomas. You came? What's going on here?" he shouted over the din of battle. "They all want me," she said, her voice trembling. "One faction wants to secure my claim to the throne, the other wants to eliminate me as a threat." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "You have to choose, Thomas, you have to choose a side. My fate, the future of the Prilorian Empire. It all depends on your decision. And perhaps humanity's future too." Thomas didn't hesitate. The Prilorian soldiers on their left wore armor subtly different from those on the right. the energy weapons in their hands a shade less menacing. But it was the flicker of fear in the eyes of the soldiers to the right as they glanced at Selene that sealed it. Fear trumped aggression. "That way," he barked, shoving Selene towards the soldiers on the left. Now, he ripped a flashbang grenade from the cache at his belt, yanking the pin. The small chamber erupted in a blinding white light, amplified by the metallic walls. A high-pitched whine, almost beyond human hearing, filled the air. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, shielding Selene with his body as best he could. Even through closed lids, the light burned. He heard shouts of confusion, the clatter of dropped weapons. "This way!" he yelled, grabbing Selene's hand and pulling her through the disoriented Prylorian soldiers. As they sprinted down a narrow corridor, Selene gasped for breath. "Those were traditionalists," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "They believe in maintaining the empires." Rigid structure, unquestioning obedience. The others, the progressives, they desire reform, greater integration with other species. They're less cruel. They burst out into a larger chamber where a sleek, heavily armed hovercraft awaited, its engines humming. The progressive soldiers ushered them inside. The craft lifted smoothly, accelerating down a tunnel. But their escape was short-lived. A barrage of energy blasts slammed into the tunnel walls ahead, showering them with sparks and debris. The pursuing traditionalists had anticipated their route. "Return fire!" a progressive soldier yelled, frantically working the hovercraft's weapons console. Energy bolts sputtered weakly from the craft's cannons, glancing harmlessly off the pursuing vehicles. "Damn it, these weapons are outdated. They can't even penetrate their shields." Thomas swore under his breath. He scanned the hovercraft's engine compartment, his eyes darting over unfamiliar alien technology. "Selene, what's the power source for this thing?" "A stabilized dark matter core," she replied, her voice trembling. "Why?" "I need to reroute the energy flow. Temporarily overload the engine." He ripped panels off the wall, exposing a tangle of wires and conduits. "It's risky. We could blow the whole thing, but it's our only chance." Ignoring the protests of the progressive soldiers, Thomas began splicing wires, his fingers moving with surprising speed and precision. He muttered to himself, recalling schematics he'd seen in ancient Prylorian texts, adapting them to this modern technology. Just a little more. Almost there. A jolt of energy surged through the craft. The engine screamed. "Hold on," Thomas yelled. The hovercraft lurched forward, accelerating with terrifying speed. The pursuing traditionalist vehicles were left in their wake, fading into the distance. Selene gripped his arm, her eyes wide. "What did you do?" "A little xeno-archaeological engineering," Thomas said, wiping sweat from his brow. "I bypassed the energy regulators. We've got a temporary speed boost, but it won't last, and it probably voided the warranty." Selene's expression turned grim. "There's something else you need to know, the research facility. It contains a prototype weapon. It can destabilize Prylorian genetic structure. Both factions want it. The traditionalists to solidify their power, the progressives to destroy it, hopefully." Another energy blast rocked the hovercraft. A stray shot. Warning lights flashed. The craft began to spin out of control. "Brace yourselves," Thomas yelled. The hovercraft slammed into the ground, crumpling against a metal barrier. The impact threw Thomas and Selene against the front console. Smoke filled the cabin. "We're down," a progressive soldier shouted, struggling to his feet. "We're near the restricted zone. The facility is just beyond those walls." Thomas coughed, his lungs burning. He checked Selene for injuries. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her face pale. "I'm fine, but we need to hurry." He glanced at a radiation meter on the damaged console. The needle was spiking. "Damn it. The facility's containment field is damaged. High levels of radiation. We need protection." They scavenged what they could from the wrecked hovercraft. Thick, lead-lined vests, helmets with cracked visors, and crude respirators. The gear was bulky and uncomfortable, but it was better than nothing. The restricted zone was a desolate wasteland of twisted metal and crumbling concrete. Warning sirens wailed incessantly. As they approached the facility's entrance, a series of laser grids flickered to life, blocking their path. Automated turrets swiveled, their targeting systems locking on. Automated defenses, Thomas muttered, still active. He examined the control panel beside the entrance, his fingers tracing the intricate patterns of Prilorian glyphs. This is ancient. Before the Empire's standardization protocols. He closed his eyes, visualizing the glyphs in his mind, comparing them to similar patterns he'd seen in long-abandoned ruins. He muttered a series of commands, his voice echoing in the desolate landscape. The laser grids flickered and died. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark passage. "Come on," he said, grabbing Seleni's hand. "Let's hope my Prilorian is still up to snuff." Inside, they found a group of scientists huddled around a console, their faces illuminated by the flickering screens. They wore the same subtly different armor as the progressive soldiers. "You made it," one of the scientists exclaimed. "We've been trying to access the weapon, but the security protocols are too complex." "The traditionalists are on their way," another scientist said, his voice filled with panic. "They plan to use the weapon to eliminate all progressives, seize complete control of the Empire." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "And what about the weapon itself? What does it do?" "It destabilizes Prilorian genetic structure," the lead scientist explained. "It could wipe out an entire population. It's catastrophic." Thomas looked at Selene, her expression a mixture of fear and willpower. He knew what he had to do. Using the weapon, even to defend her, was not an option. The consequences were too great. Suddenly, the facility shook violently. Energy blasts slammed into the walls. The traditionalist assault had begun. "They're here." A scientist screamed. Chaos erupted. Energy fire crisscrossed the chamber. Scientists scrambled for cover. In the confusion, Selene was separated from Thomas. He reached for her, but it was too late. A group of traditionalist soldiers seized her, dragging her away. "Selene!" Thomas yelled, his voice lost in the din of battle. He fought his way through the melee, desperate to reach her, but he was outnumbered and outgunned. A traditionalist soldier slammed the butt of his rifle into Thomas's head. He staggered, his vision blurring. When he regained his senses, Selene was gone. A holographic image flickered to life before him, resolving into the stern face of a Prilorian general. The general's eyes were cold and calculating. "Thomas Harris," the general said, his voice a low growl. "I am General Vorlag, leader of the traditionalist faction. You have something I want." Vorlag paused, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "I know about your past, the incident on Cygnus VII, the children." Thomas felt a wave of nausea wash over him. His past. The memory he had tried so hard to bury. Vorlag knew. "I have Selene," Vorlag continued, "and I know how much she means to you. Surrender yourself to me within 1 hour, or Selene will be executed, and the weapon will be used to eliminate all progressives. The choice is yours." The image flickered and died. Thomas was alone, surrounded by the wreckage of the facility. He had 1 hour to save Selene, 1 hour to prevent a catastrophe, 1 hour to confront his past. He clenched his fist, his nucleus tightening. "I'm coming for you, Selene," he whispered, "and I'm going to stop this, no matter what it takes." He had a plan, a desperate, impossible plan that hinged on his knowledge of the facility and Prilorian technology, but it was all he had. The deadline be damned. Thomas ignored the flashing countdown dominating the corner of his visor. Every second spent agonizing over Vorlag's ultimatum was a second Selene had less. He moved with a focused intensity, his movements economical, driven by a singular purpose: reconnaissance and resource gathering. The wrecked hovercraft, a mangled monument to his disastrous arrival, now served as his makeshift sanctuary. He attacked the wreckage with practiced efficiency, his multi-tool spitting sparks as he carved out usable components. A power cell, miraculously intact, hummed with latent energy. Communication devices, their casings cracked but circuits potentially salvageable, went into his pack. Even the twisted remnants of the hovercraft's pulse rifle, shattered beyond recognition, held promise. Fragments of the focusing array, shards of the energy cell, everything was potential. Minutes later, jury-rigged cables snaked from the power cell to a dormant Prilorian communication array nestled against the cliff face, half buried in the red dust. It was a local system, designed for intra-facility communication, long since abandoned. Thomas bypassed the primary power conduits, feeding the array a jolt of stolen energy. The activation sequence crawled across a corroded display, each passing moment stretching into an eternity. He needed to know what the traditionalists were planning, and quickly. He needed to intercept their communications. The response was frustratingly slow. Static hissed from the array's speakers, punctuated by bursts of encrypted data. But as the system warmed, fragmented transmissions began to coalesce. Vorlag had tightened security around Seleni's location. The facility bristled with new surveillance drones, their multifaceted lenses glinting in the dim light. Advanced sensor grids blanketed the corridors, monitoring every vibration, every thermal signature. Thomas cursed under his breath. He needed to bypass those sensors. He moved with stealth born of desperation, hugging the shadows, his senses heightened. But the Prilorian technology was insidious. Just as he thought he had found a blind spot, a high-pitched whine filled the air. An alarm. He triggered a proximity sensor. A low thrum announced the arrival of a patrol unit, 3 heavily armored Prilorians, their weapons trained on his last known location. Thomas didn't hesitate. He knew the facility's blueprints better than they did. He plunged into a disused maintenance tunnel, a claustrophobic passage choked with dust and forgotten equipment. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of corroded pipes and the acrid stench of leaking chemicals. He scrambled through the darkness, the patrol's heavy footsteps echoing behind him. The tunnel twisted and turned, a labyrinth of forgotten maintenance routes. He reached a junction, 3 paths diverging into the gloom. He chose the one least likely to be patrolled, a narrow shaft marked with biohazard symbols. A gamble, but one he had to take. He heard the patrol unit hesitate at the junction, their voices crackling over their comms. He pressed on, the air growing thicker, the stench more overpowering. He could feel the chemicals burning his nostrils, stinging his eyes, but he was buying time. Then a snippet of conversation bleeding through the static of the comm array in his ear. It was Vorlag's lieutenant barking orders. Selene was being moved to a more secure location. Within the hour, the air in Thomas's lungs constricted. An hour. He was running out of time. He burst from the maintenance tunnel into a vast, echoing chamber. Energy conduits, thick as starship mooring cables, snaked across the ceiling, pulsing with raw power. They fed the facility's defense systems, its sensor grids, its weapon emplacements. A network of veins pumping lifeblood into the traditionalist fortress. An idea, reckless and audacious, began to form. He needed a diversion, something big. Something that would throw the entire facility into chaos. And those energy conduits, they were the key. He worked feverishly, his hands flying across the scavenged components. The shattered pulse rifle, the salvaged power cell, the hacked communication device, he fused them together with a desperate ingenuity, his mind racing. It was crude, dangerous, but it might just work. He was building an EMP, a makeshift electromagnetic pulse device, designed to overload the energy conduits to disrupt the flow of power, to create a window of opportunity. He found a critical junction point where a cluster of conduits converged, feeding power to multiple sectors. It was the perfect spot. He carefully planted the EMP device, setting a timer for 15 minutes. Enough time to get clear, enough time to cause maximum disruption. As he armed the device, he overheard voices. 2 Prilorian scientists, their tones hushed and conspiratorial, standing near the junction point. He froze, pressing himself against the cold metal of the conduit. "The prototype is ready for final calibration," one was saying. "Are you certain of the targeting parameters?" The other replied, "The director's vision is ambitious. The weapon is precise," the first scientist insisted. "It can rewrite the genetic code of a single individual or an entire population." Thomas's blood ran cold. Rewrite genetic code. He had assumed it was a weapon designed to kill, to incapacitate, but this was something far more sinister. The director believes that by purifying the Prylorian race, eliminating the undesirable traits, he can forge a new era of strength and unity. Vorlag wasn't just targeting the progressives. He was planning a genetic purge, a species-wide cleansing. Thomas's grip tightened on his multi-tool. Selene, she was progressive. She was exactly the kind of undesirable Vorlag sought to eliminate. He didn't hesitate. He activated the EMP device, overriding the timer, triggering immediate detonation. The world exploded. A blinding flash of light, a deafening roar, and then darkness. The conduits buckled and burst, showering sparks and molten metal. The chamber shook violently, throwing Thomas to the ground. Alarms blared, emergency lights flickered erratically. Chaos reigned. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the ringing in his ears, the throbbing in his head. The diversion had worked. Now he needed to find Selene. He navigated the smoke-filled corridors, his vision obscured, his senses overloaded. He reached the main command center, its blast doors hanging open, its interior a scene of pandemonium. Prylorian technicians scrambled to restore power, their faces illuminated by the flickering displays. A lone traditionalist officer, his uniform singed, his face grim, stood hunched over a console, desperately trying to reboot the surveillance system. He was Thomas's only obstacle. He moved quickly, silently, catching the officer by surprise. He slammed the Prylorian against the console, the impact cracking the screen. The officer roared, a guttural sound of rage, and retaliated with a powerful blow. Thomas staggered back, his head reeling. The Prylorian was bigger, stronger, but Thomas was faster, more resourceful. He dodged another blow, grabbed a discarded power cable and wrapped it around the officer's legs, sending him crashing to the floor. He straddled the downed officer, raining blows down on his armored face. The Prylorian struggled, but Thomas held him firm, his adrenaline surging. He landed a final, decisive punch, and the officer went limp. He scrambled to the console, his fingers flying across the Prylorian interface. He needed to locate Selene. The system sputtered back to life, displaying a schematic of the facility. He searched for her designation, his heart pounding in his chest. There, he found her, held in a heavily fortified laboratory on the lower levels. As he prepared to leave the command center, a garbled message crackled over the comm system. It was Selene, her voice weak and distorted, barely audible above the din. "Thomas, it's a trap. Vorlag knows." "Vorlag knows," Selene's warning echoed in Thomas's mind. He swore under his breath, pivoting sharply away from the main corridor. Damn it, he'd been too predictable. Trusting Selene was a gamble, but her urgency felt genuine. He had to assume Vorlag had anticipated his direct approach. Thomas called up the laboratory schematics on his wrist-mounted display, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The lab itself was a fortress, built with the same obsessive precision he'd seen in countless Prylorian ruins. Layers of defense, redundancies piled upon redundancies. It was like studying the blueprints of an ancient tomb, each layer designed to deter intruders. He quickly identified a less obvious route, a service tunnel running beneath the main complex. Vorlag would expect him to go straight for the front door. The main entrance was, as expected, a gauntlet of laser grids and heavily armed sentinels. A diversion, clearly, but the service tunnel. The schematics showed minimal security. He rerouted his path, heading for the discreet access point tucked away in a maintenance alcove. The tunnels were cramped and dimly lit, the air thick with the metallic tang of coolant. It was far from undefended, though. Laser grids crisscrossed the passageway, slicing through the gloom in emerald patterns. Then came the sonic barrier's invisible walls of concentrated sound that vibrated in his teeth, threatening to shatter his skull. He knelt, rummaging through his scavenged gear. The half-disassembled EMP device, initially intended to disable the weapon, would have to serve a different purpose. He carefully extracted a capacitor, rerouting its power flow with a delicate touch. For the laser grid, he jury-rigged a frequency jammer, overloading the sensors with static. The sonic barrier required a more direct approach. He modified the EMP's core to emit a counter-frequency, a focused blast of anti-sound that, hopefully, wouldn't deafen him in the process. As the counter-frequency pulsed through the tunnel, nullifying the sonic barrier's vibrations, a red light blinked to life on the wall panel. Silent alarm. Vorlag knew. A high-pitched whine echoed through the tunnel, the sound of approaching drones. He risked a glance behind him. 3 sleek obsidian shapes were rapidly closing the distance, their weapon ports glowing menacingly. Specialized security drones designed for close-quarters combat. The hunt was on. He sprinted deeper into the tunnels, his boots pounding against the metal floor. The schematics became his lifeline, guiding him through a maze of corridors and ventilation shafts. He led the drones on a twisting chase, exploiting the tunnel's tight corners and dead ends. Twice he managed to lure them into cul-de-sacs, sealing the entrances with emergency bulkheads, buying precious seconds. But the drones were relentless. He could hear them gaining, their whirring growing louder, closer. He risked another glance. Their sensors were glowing brighter, more intensely. They weren't just tracking movement, they were tracking his life signs. Advanced scanning technology. He needed to disappear. He dove into a recessed maintenance bay, his eyes scanning frantically. A discarded maintenance suit lay crumpled in the corner, its thermal shielding torn and useless. Or was it? An idea sparked in his mind. It was a long shot, but he was out of options. He ripped off a section of the thermal shielding, wrapping it around his torso, hoping to mask his heat signature. A desperate, improvised camouflage. He pressed himself against the cold metal wall, holding his breath as the drones swept past, their sensors momentarily confused by the disrupted thermal readings. They paused, hovering for a heartbeat, then continued down the tunnel, their search pattern widening. He'd bought himself some time. He continued, reaching the service hatch beneath the laboratory. It was sealed tight, a reinforced locking mechanism gleaming under the dim light. A shimmering energy shield pulsed with barely held-back power. He pulled out the Prilorian access code he'd lifted from the command center, inputting it into the hatch's control panel. Access denied. Code deactivated. Vorlag had thought of everything. He stared at the energy shield, its hum resonating in his chest. It was powerful, but he recognized the power signature. It was drawing directly from the facility's main reactor. A risky idea began to form in his mind, one involving a carefully timed surge and a whole lot of luck. He tapped into the facility's power grid through his wrist-mounted device, rerouting energy flows, creating a controlled overload. The lights flickered, then dimmed, then surged back to life with blinding intensity. Alarms blared through the tunnels. He channeled the surge, focusing its energy on the hatch's locking mechanism. With a final, desperate command, he triggered a small, localized explosion at the service hatch. The tunnel shook, sparks flew. The locking mechanism twisted and shattered. The energy shield flickered, sputtered, and died. A gaping hole opened in the floor, leading up into the laboratory. He clambered through the opening, weapon raised, adrenaline coursing through his veins. The laboratory was exactly as he'd pictured it, sterile, clinical, and deadly. Selene was there, strapped to a table, her eyes wide with fear, and Vorlag was waiting for him, flanked by 2 heavily armed Prilorian guards. Vorlag smiled, a cruel, predatory expression. "Welcome, Dr. Harris." I must admit, you are more resourceful than I anticipated, but ultimately predictable. Selene was merely bait, a lure to draw you into my little trap. Vorlag gestured towards a large, ominous device in the center of the room, the genetic rewriting weapon. Now, I have both the weapon and a suitable test subject. I always wondered what its effects would be on a human. He raised the weapon, aiming it directly at Thomas. Selene strained against her restraints, her eyes pleading. A faint tremor ran through the air, a subtle manifestation of her mental abilities. Just a flicker, a moment's distraction, but enough. Vorlag fired. Thomas dove for cover behind a nearby console, the energy beam searing the air where he'd been standing. The beam struck the wall behind him, not with an explosion but with a strange, resonating hum. The laboratory began to tremble. A high-pitched whine filled the air, growing louder, more insistent. The containment field, designed to isolate the weapon's effects, flickered and died. Something was terribly wrong. The energy slammed against the containment field, turning the shimmering barrier into a fractured kaleidoscope. For a split second, Thomas glimpsed them. Grotesque, shifting forms, a flash of chitinous armor, a glimpse of iridescent scales, a suggestion of too many eyes. Then the field stabilized, the distorted images snapping back to a hazy, indistinct blur. Secure them. Vorlag roared, his voice tight with fury. The weapon is paramount. Guards, restrain them. Thomas didn't hesitate. Amidst the chaos, a discarded Prylorian data pad lay near Vorlag's fallen weapon. He lunged for it, his fingers closing around the cool, smooth surface. Selene, understanding instantly, focused her gaze on the nearest guards. Metal scraps dislodged from the damaged equipment lifted from the floor. With a flick of her wrist, she sent them hurtling towards the Prylorians, creating a hail of metallic shrapnel. The guards stumbled, momentarily distracted. Thomas tapped furiously at the data pad, Prylorian script flashing across the screen. Access code required, a synthesized voice announced. He cursed under his breath. Prylorian security protocols were notoriously complex, but he'd spent years studying them. He began a rapid sequence of inputs, his fingers dancing across the interface. A klaxon blared, its piercing shriek echoing through the lab. Warning, containment breach imminent. Lockdown procedures initiated. Red lights strobed, casting long, distorted shadows. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone. Thomas swore again, sweat beading on his forehead. He bypassed a level of encryption, and a fragmented schematic of the weapon appeared on the screen, a tangle of energy conduits, genetic sequencers, and containment matrices. It was a start, but far from a complete picture. Vorlag, having regained his composure, shoved past the stunned guards. His eyes burned with righteous fury. You will not interfere. He lunged at Thomas, a vibro blade humming to life in his hand. The remaining guards swarmed Selene, their movements clumsy but determined. During their struggle, Thomas noticed something odd. The weapon's residual energy beam, still flickering intermittently, seemed to react with certain elements in the lab. When it struck a panel of reinforced plasteel, the material shimmered and warped. When it grazed a cluster of crystalline power regulators, the crystals pulsed with an unnatural light. It's interacting with the environment, Thomas shouted to Selene, dodging Vorlag's blade. Specific materials, energy fields. They're amplifying or negating the effect. Thomas. Selene's voice cut through the din. Vorlag. He's going to overload the weapon. He wants to trigger an implosion. Thomas's blood ran cold. An implosion. That would breach the containment entirely. Those entities, whatever they were, would be released. We can't let that happen. He realized an iron will settling over him. Escape wasn't the priority anymore. Disabling the weapon was. He changed his tactics, using his knowledge of the lab's layout to his advantage. He backpedaled, leading Vorlag towards a section containing a series of unstable experimental power cells, volatile spheres of contained energy, humming with barely suppressed power. You can't stop what's coming. Vorlag snarled, his vibro blade slicing through the air. Thomas fainted, then slammed his elbow into one of the power cells. A cascade of sparks erupted as the cell cracked, releasing a surge of electromagnetic energy. The lab lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the room into near darkness. The weapon sputtered, its targeting system momentarily disrupted by the EMP. The darkness was broken only by the faint glow of the damaged power cells and the strobing red emergency lights. Selene seized her chance. With a guttural cry, she unleashed the full force of her mental abilities. The remaining guards crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "We have to get out of here," Thomas yelled, grabbing Selene's hand. Suddenly, Vorlag's voice echoed through the darkness, tinged with triumph. "You may have delayed me, but you have failed. I have initiated the emergency protocol." A synthesized voice, cold and impersonal, filled the lab. "Self-destruct sequence initiated. T-5 minutes. Self-destruct," Thomas exclaimed, his heart sinking. "The Empire will not allow this weapon to fall into the wrong hands," Vorlag said, his voice filled with fanaticism. "Even if it means sacrificing ourselves. The failsafe will activate upon destruction, ensuring it can never be used against Prylos." Thomas felt a surge of adrenaline. They had to override the sequence, or escape before the entire facility was vaporized. He pulled Selene towards the exit, his mind racing. They reached the main blast doors, the only way out. But as they approached, they saw Vorlag, bathed in the red glow of the emergency lights, manipulating a control panel. With a final, decisive gesture, he banged his hand down on a large, red button. "Blast doors sealed," the synthesized voice announced. "Self-destruct sequence continues." The heavy doors slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing them inside. A large digital display above the doors flashed a stark, red countdown, 4:58. The data pad sparked uselessly, its interface displaying a cascade of error messages. "He locked us out," Thomas spat, tossing the pad aside. Vorlag anticipated this. Selene didn't reply, her brow furrowed in concentration. She gathered loose pieces of metal and twisted wreckage, her small hands trembling with effort. The debris floated around her, forming a makeshift battering ram aimed at the blast doors. With a grunt, she launched it forward. The ram slammed against the reinforced metal with a dull thud that vibrated through the lab. Nothing. A distorted voice crackled over the lab's comm system. "Still playing games, little Xeno lover. You can't break through those doors. They're designed to withstand a direct hit from a Prylorian dreadnought. Your efforts are pathetic." Vorlag's voice dripped with cruel amusement. "Know that you're dying for the glory of the Prylorian Empire. A fitting end for a traitor and a pet." Selene ignored him, her eyes narrowed. "I detect faint life signs beyond the doors," she said, her voice strained. "Another section of the facility is still active." Thomas ran a hand through his thinning hair. "The self-destruct. It might not destroy the entire facility, just this weapons research lab, containment protocol." He paused, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Which means the emergency protocol might open the blast doors after a certain point in the sequence, to contain the explosion within this section." Selene touched the blast door, her fingers tracing the seams. "There is a weakening," she announced, her voice barely audible above the rising hum of the self-destruct sequence. "A point where the structural integrity is compromised. Perhaps the EMP." "Focus your telekinesis there," Thomas instructed, already rummaging through the wreckage of the lab. "That's our best shot. I need something to amplify your power." He scavenged frantically, his eyes scanning the debris. He spotted it, a high-frequency sonic emitter designed to resonate with Prylorian alloys. It was damaged but salvageable. Bingo. He began stripping wires and rerouting power conduits, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine filled the lab. The air grew thin, making it hard to breathe. "He's venting the atmosphere from the adjacent section," Thomas wheezed, creating a pressure differential, reinforcing the doors. Ignoring the burning in his lungs, Thomas finished modifying the sonic emitter. "This won't breach the door," he yelled over the whine, "but it might overload the locking mechanism, trigger localized thermal expansion, give you a chance." He handed the emitter to Selene. She took it, her small face pale with exertion. The pressure was immense, pushing against her, making her movement sluggish. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she focused her telekinetic energy on the weak point, the sonic emitter humming in her hand. A hairline fracture appeared on the door's surface, spiderwebbing outwards. "Almost," she gasped. Then a small breach appeared, just large enough for one person to squeeze through. "Go," Thomas urged, his voice hoarse. "You have to go first. You're more valuable than I am, your lineage. You can stop this wider conflict." Selene shook her head, her eyes filled with a stubborn defiance he hadn't seen before. "I will not leave you behind, Thomas. I rely on you." Vorlag's voice returned, permeated with fury. "So be it. Die together then." A surge of energy pulsed through the lab. "I'm activating the weapon's failsafe from my location. Implosion sequence accelerated. Enjoy your last moments." Thomas felt it, a tremor in the floor, a building pressure in the air. The weapon was about to tear itself apart. "Selene, now." He pushed her towards the breach. As she hesitated, he grabbed the sonic emitter from her hand. "I'm rigging this to cause a feedback loop in the containment field. Might buy us a few seconds." He shoved the emitter towards the damaged control panel next to the door. Sparks flew as he jammed the wires into the exposed circuits. He gave Selene a final shove, sending her sprawling through the opening. As he slid through the narrow gap himself, the sonic emitter overloaded. A focused burst of energy ripped through the blast doors, momentarily widening the breach beyond its intended limits. Metal screamed, twisted, and buckled. Thomas and Selene stumbled into the adjacent section, gasping for air. They found themselves in a cryogenic storage facility. Rows upon rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing a pale, still figure, the genetically altered species. Then the self-destruct sequence completed. The implosion began. A wave of concussive force slammed into the facility. As the pressure released, the stasis pods began to open, hissing as their seals broke. An alarm blared, deafening and insistent. The cryogenic chamber hissed open, releasing a cloud of supercooled vapor that swirled around the awakened Prilorians. Groans, guttural and strained, echoed through the chamber as the figures within began to stir. They were immense, easily 8 feet tall, their muscles bulging beneath thick, corded skin that shimmered with an unnatural sheen. One of them, its face contorted in a mask of confusion and rage, slammed a fist against the side of its cryopod, the metal buckling inward with a screech. Before Thomas could even process the scene, one of the Prilorians lurched forward, its eyes locking onto Selene. It roared, a sound that vibrated in Thomas's chest, and charged. "Selene!" Thomas shouted, grabbing a discarded length of metal piping from the floor. He swung it with desperate force, connecting with the Prilorian's leg. The pipe crumpled like foil, barely slowing the creature down. Selene, moving with surprising speed, darted around the Prilorian, grabbing a discarded energy pistol from a nearby table. She fired, the blue bolt impacting the Prilorian's chest. It staggered back, momentarily stunned but far from incapacitated. Thomas noticed something was off. The Prilorian, despite its immense size and strength, moved with a clumsy, uncoordinated gait. It stumbled over its own feet, its roars more animalistic than articulate. The awakening process hadn't gone as planned. "They're disoriented," Thomas yelled, dodging a swipe from the Prilorian's massive hand. Something went wrong. Selene fired another shot, this time hitting the Prilorian in the head. It roared in pain, clutching its skull, but quickly recovered. "The augmentation," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "It was designed to create super soldiers, but their minds, they're fractured." They exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They couldn't fight their way out. They had to use the chaos to their advantage. Gripping the energy pistol tighter, Selene led the way, weaving between the disoriented giants, Thomas close behind, his eyes scanning for any sign of danger. As they moved deeper into the facility, Thomas consulted his scanner. "Damn it," he muttered. "This place is bigger than I thought. The cryogenic facility is located much deeper within the mountain than my initial scans indicated." Suddenly, Selene stopped, her head tilted slightly. "I detect a Prilorian distress signal," she whispered. "Faint, but definitely Prilorian. It's originating from a distant part of the facility." Thomas hesitated. "It could be a trap. It could also be a chance," Selene countered, her eyes filled with a determined glint. "A chance to communicate with the Empire, to explain what happened here, to de-escalate this situation." He knew she was right. Their only hope was to find someone who could understand, someone who could stop Vorlag's plan. "All right," he said. "Let's go." They moved cautiously through the facility's corridors, the groans and roars of the awakened Prilorians echoing around them. They rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with another group of the augmented soldiers. This time, they didn't attack head-on. They ducked into a darkened alcove, pressing themselves against the cold metal walls, holding their breath as the Prilorians lumbered past, oblivious to their presence. Thomas pulled up a schematic of the facility on his scanner. "I've got it," he said, pointing to a section of the map. "The ventilation system. It runs throughout the entire complex." A plan began to form in his mind. They made their way to a control panel near a ventilation shaft. Thomas quickly rerouted the system, sealing off a large section and isolating the group of Prilorians within. Selene activated the cryogenic gas release. A wave of frigid air rushed through the vents, quickly freezing the Prilorians in their tracks. "That'll buy us some time," Thomas said, wiping sweat from his brow. Following the signal, they finally reached a heavily fortified chamber. Inside, slumped against a console, was a Prilorian scientist, his armor torn and scorched, a pool of dark fluid spreading beneath him. You shouldn't be here," the scientist rasped, his voice weak. "We're trying to stop this," Selene said, kneeling beside him. "What happened? Why were these Prilorians awakened?" The scientist coughed, a fleck of dark fluid splattering on his chin. "Vorlag," he whispered. "He initiated the failsafe remotely, against the orders of the High Council." "Failsafe?" Thomas asked. "The cryogenic program was meant to be a last resort," the scientist explained. "But Vorlag, he saw it as a weapon. He wanted to create an army of super soldiers." He paused, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "But the process, it wasn't perfected. The awakened Prilorians, they're suffering from severe mental degradation. They're unpredictable, dangerous." "Is there any way to stop them?" Selene asked. The scientist shook his head weakly. "No, but there's a hidden escape route, a tunnel leading to an abandoned research outpost outside the complex." He fumbled for a data chip, his fingers trembling. This contains a security override code. It can disable the facility's lockdown systems, but only temporarily." As they prepared to leave, the chamber door burst open. A group of awakened Prilorians charged in, led by an especially large and aggressive specimen, easily 10 feet tall, its eyes burning with savage fury. "Get out of here, Selene," Thomas yelled, shoving her behind him. He grabbed a discarded energy rifle and opened fire, the bolts ripping through the air. Selene, despite her injuries, rejoined the fight, firing her pistol with deadly accuracy. They fought back to back, a whirlwind of energy blasts and desperate maneuvers. Thomas felt a searing pain in his arm as a Prilorian's claw grazed his flesh. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the pain, focusing on protecting Selene. Suddenly, a Prilorian lunged at Selene, its massive hand raised to strike. Thomas, reacting instinctively, threw himself in front of her, taking the brunt of the blow. He cried out in pain as the Prilorian's fist connected with his chest, sending him sprawling. Selene screamed, her eyes blazing with fury. She unleashed a torrent of energy blasts, focusing all her rage on the Prilorian that had attacked Thomas. The creature roared and fell, its body convulsing. Thomas struggled to his feet, his chest aching. He looked at Selene, her face etched with concern. A surge of protective anger coursed through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "The code," he said, his voice hoarse. "Use the code." Selene nodded, quickly inserting the data chip into a nearby console. The lockdown systems disengaged with a series of loud clicks. They sprinted towards the escape tunnel, leaving the cryogenic facility behind as the unstable super soldiers continued to wreak havoc. The forest swallowed them whole. A frigid dampness clung to Thomas's exposed skin, each breath misting in the inky air. Selene stumbled beside him, her small frame shuddering. He could feel the heat radiating from her injury even through his borrowed enviro suit. Every step she took was a visible struggle, her left leg dragging slightly. A snap of a twig, not theirs. Before Thomas could react, a hulking figure crashed through the undergrowth, a Prylorian super soldier larger, more brutally augmented than any he'd seen in Vorlag's facility. Its eyes glowed with predatory intensity, its weapon already raised. "Selene, run!" Thomas yelled, shoving her towards a cluster of thick-trunked trees. He knew he was no match for the soldier, but maybe, just maybe. He grabbed a handful of the phosphorescent fungi growing on a fallen log and hurled it at the soldier. The glowing spores burst in a cloud of light, momentarily blinding the creature. It roared in fury, swatting at the air. It was enough. Thomas grabbed Selene's hand, pulling her deeper into the woods. The soldiers' enraged bellows echoed behind them, spurring them onward. They needed cover, and fast. They found it sooner than he expected. A barely visible depression in the earth, choked with vines and overgrown with moss. He recognized it instantly, an abandoned research outpost, swallowed by the jungle. The main entrance was a solid durasteel door, sealed shut. No visible keypad, no obvious access point, just a smooth, unyielding surface. "Stand back," Thomas said, his fingers already tracing the faint, almost invisible symbols etched into the metal. Ancient Prylorian. A locking mechanism, far older and more sophisticated than anything Vorlag was currently using. He pulled out his archaeological toolkit, selecting a micro-scanner and a set of delicate probes. This was going to take time. After what felt like an eternity, a section of the door shimmered and disappeared, revealing a narrow opening. A gust of stale, recycled air rushed out, carrying the scent of dust and decay. The outpost was dark, but not entirely dead. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows. A low hum vibrated through the floor, a sign that some systems were still operational. He pulled out his sidearm, checking the power cell. "Stay close," he murmured, leading Selene inside. The main control room was a wreck, consoles smashed, wires hanging like tangled vines. But a few terminals still glowed with a faint green light. Thomas approached one cautiously, running a diagnostic program. To his surprise, it booted up, rudimentary but functional. "I'm going to see what I can find about Vorlag's operations," he said to Selene, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "There's something over here," Selene called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. She stood before a hidden doorway, concealed behind a panel of cracked plasteel. It led to a small, cramped laboratory, filled with strange equipment and scattered notes. Thomas joined her, his eyes scanning the lab. Beakers filled with viscous fluids, humming centrifuges, and data pads covered in complex equations. The air hung heavy with the metallic tang of chemicals. He accessed one of the data pads, his face grimacing as he scrolled through the files. "Vorlag was conducting unauthorized experiments here," he said, his voice tight with anger. "Genetic manipulation, trying to create a more powerful Prylorian warrior race." Selene gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's forbidden. The Council would never allow it." She moved further into the lab, examining a series of holographic displays. "This is a map," she said, pointing to a detailed schematic of the surrounding area. "There's a hidden underground facility not far from here." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery settling upon them. Vorlag's ambition, his willingness to break the most sacred laws of the Prylorian Empire. It was terrifying. Why would he do this? Selene asked, her voice barely a whisper. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Power, control, the same reasons anyone does anything monstrous. He looked at Selene, her face pale and drawn. We have to stop him. He noticed her limping again, more pronounced this time. He knelt down, examining her leg. The wound was festering, the regeneration process clearly struggling. This isn't good, he said, pulling out a medical kit. I need to clean this and apply a regenerative patch. It's not much, but it's all I've got. As he worked, he accessed another terminal, bringing up a series of archived messages. His blood ran cold as he read the last entry. Containment breach, he muttered, his eyes wide with alarm. Outpost abandoned due to the escape of a dangerous alien organism. Quarantine protocols in effect. Suddenly, a klaxon blared through the outpost, its shrill wail cutting through the silence. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. What was that? Selene cried, her eyes darting around nervously. Before Thomas could answer, a series of metallic clicks echoed through the corridors. From the shadows, small, hovering drones emerged, their weapons trained on them. Automated defense systems, activated. The organism, Thomas realized, his voice grim. The drones are programmed to protect it. The drones opened fire, energy bolts searing through the air. Thomas grabbed Selene, pulling her behind an overturned console. They were trapped. There has to be a way to disable them, he shouted over the din of the alarm and the whine of the drone's weapons. Some kind of control panel. He scrambled through the wreckage, his eyes scanning the walls. He spotted it, a small, recessed panel, half hidden behind a tangle of wires. He ripped the wires away, revealing a keypad. It needs a code, he said, his fingers tracing the unfamiliar symbols. Ancient Prylorian again, more complex than the door lock. He rummaged through his pack, pulling out a small, intricately carved Prylorian artifact he'd found earlier in the ruins. He held it up to the keypad, rotating it slowly. As the artifact aligned with the symbols, a series of numbers appeared on the panel. He punched in the code, his heart pounding in his chest. The drones hesitated, their weapons wavering. Just as he was about to hit the disable command, a low growl echoed from the depths of the outpost. The ground trembled. A wave of cold, stale air washed over them. From the shadows, something vast and shadowy emerged, its form shifting and indistinct. A monstrous silhouette against the flashing red lights. The alien organism, and it was heading straight for them. The shadowy tendril lashed out, a blur of darkness aimed at Thomas's head. He ducked, the air whistling where it had been a moment before. The stench of ozone and something akin to burnt sugar filled his nostrils. He scrambled back, knocking over a stack of corroded data slates. "Selene, behind me," he yelled, already knowing it was a futile gesture. She was hobbling, favoring her left leg. The creature had clipped her earlier, and the wound was clearly aggravated by their frantic movements. A thin trickle of luminescent blue blood seeped through her makeshift bandage. The creature pulsed, its shadowy form rippling as it changed direction, focusing on Thomas. It emitted a low, guttural hum, almost subsonic, that vibrated in his chest. He noticed a pattern. The attack seemed to intensify after the hum. It was reacting to something. Some kind of sound. Thomas fumbled for his handheld scanner, a battered piece of archaeological equipment he'd modified over the years. He flicked it on, the screen flickering to life with a chaotic display of energy signatures. He adjusted the settings, filtering out the ambient radiation, focusing on the organism. A series of complex waveforms scrolled across the screen, too fast to decipher, but then he saw it, a repeating signal pattern buried within the chaos, a rhythmic pulse like a heartbeat. "There's a signal," he said, more to himself than to Selene. "A repeating pattern. It's trying to communicate." Selene winced, clutching her leg. "Prylorians. We have encountered such beings before." We call them void whispers. Her voice was strained, each word an effort. Thomas frowned. Void whispers, I've never heard of them. Legends, she gasped. Stories of beings from between dimensions, they say. Void whispers can manipulate genetic material, shape flesh, rewrite life itself. A chill ran down Thomas's spine. Vorlag, he knew about this. He was trying to harness it. The implications were staggering. A weapon capable of rewriting life. A super soldier program unlike anything he could have imagined. He sought power, Selene said, her eyes filled with a distant dread. Thomas, ignoring the throbbing in his temples, began barking commands to the outpost's antiquated systems. I'm going to try to override its signal. See if I can establish some kind of control. He accessed the outpost's communication array, a relic from a bygone era of planetary exploration. He began rerouting power, bypassing safety protocols, his fingers flying across the corroded console. This is going to be rough. Brace yourself. He initiated the transmission, sending out a counter signal designed to disrupt the Void Whisper's communication pattern. The effect was immediate and violent. The outpost's lights flickered, the hum of the machinery intensified into a deafening roar, and sparks flew from exposed wires. The entire structure shuddered. Systems overloading. A synthesized voice shrieked from the console. Critical failure imminent. Shutting down. Thomas ignored the warnings, his eyes glued to the scanner. He frantically adjusted the frequency and amplitude of the counter signal, pushing the ancient equipment to its limits. He felt a tingling sensation in his teeth, a physical manifestation of the energy coursing through the room. Then, something shifted. The chaotic waveforms on the scanner began to coalesce, forming a more coherent pattern. The Void Whisper's shadowy form seemed to solidify, becoming less amorphous, more defined. He could almost make out shapes within the darkness, like limbs and a head. He sensed something else, too. A growing awareness, a flicker of intelligence within the creature's alien mind. It was as if the Void Whisper was beginning to understand his intentions. A connection, however fragile, was forming. Suddenly, the Void Whisper convulsed, its shadowy form flickering violently. It emitted a piercing shriek that shattered the remaining lights in the outpost. What's happening? Thomas shouted over the din, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't see the answer, but he felt it. A surge of raw energy, powerful enough to make the very air crackle, slammed into the outpost, disrupting the connection to the Void Whisper. The scanner went blank. The creature's form dissolved back into shadow, and the outpost plunged into near darkness, lit only by the flickering emergency lights. Prilorian, Selene whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. That energy. It's consistent with Prilorian warship technology, but unlike anything I've ever encountered. Thomas, his mind racing, accessed the outpost's long-range scanner. The screen flickered to life, displaying a distorted image of space. He adjusted the filters, focusing on the source of the energy surge. A massive object was approaching the planet, moving at an impossible speed. He zoomed in, enhancing the image until the object perseveranced itself into a definite shape. It was a warship, undeniably Prilorian in design, but unlike anything he had ever seen. It was colossal, dwarfing even the largest dreadnoughts in the human fleet. Its hull gleamed with an iridescent sheen, and strange, pulsating energy fields surrounded it. The warship was emitting a powerful signal, a focused beam of energy that seemed to be interfering with the Void Whisper's connection to Thomas. Thomas stared at the image, his heart pounding. Someone was coming for the Void Whisper, and they were willing to use extreme force to get it. Thomas Harris stared at the smoking remains, a lump forming in his throat. It looked exactly like a child, no bigger than 6 years old. The twisted metal of the crashed transport still hissed, acrid smoke stinging his nostrils. He coughed, waving a hand in front of his face, and knelt beside the small form. Her face was smeared with soot, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Prilorian, undoubtedly. The elongated skull, the subtle shimmer of her skin, he'd seen enough hollows of the species to recognize the signs. Galaxy's deadliest species reduced to this. He felt a pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected. He hadn't meant to trigger the transport's defense grid. It was supposed to be dormant. A routine salvage mission turned into this. He reached out, hesitating before touching her. Prilorians were known for their resilience, but this looked fatal. As his fingers brushed against her neck, he felt it, a faint pulse, almost imperceptible but definitely there. He scrambled back, his heart pounding. Impossible. The energy blast should have vaporized her. Yet, she was alive, or at least not entirely dead. He pulled out his scanner, its cool metal a comfort against his sweaty palm. He ran it over her body, the screen flickering with data. The readings were bizarre. Her cellular structure seemed to be regenerating at an impossible rate. Fractured bones were knitting themselves back together. Burns were fading before his eyes. What in the hell? He muttered more to himself than anyone else. A soft groan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes the color of molten gold. She stared up at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and pain. "Where?" she whispered, her voice weak but clear. The words were Prilonian, but his translator implant rendered them in perfect English. You're in the wreckage," Thomas stammered, still reeling from the shock. "Your transport crashed. I thought you were dead." Her gaze sharpened, focusing on him with unnerving intensity. "Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Harris. I'm an archaeologist." He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowed. "Prilorians don't apologize," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We take what is ours." A chill ran down Thomas's spine. He knew the reputation of the Prilorian Empire: ruthless, unforgiving. They wouldn't take kindly to the death of one of their own, especially not a child. "I can help you," he said quickly, trying to keep his voice steady. "I can get you out of here, back to your people." She pushed herself up, wincing in pain. "I don't need your help, human." She looked around, her gaze settling on a piece of twisted metal. With surprising strength, she ripped it free from the wreckage. It was jagged and sharp, a makeshift weapon. "Stay back," she warned, her eyes blazing with defiance, "or I will kill you." Thomas stared at her, a strange mix of fear and admiration swirling within him. This wasn't just any child. This was a Prilorian. And even injured, even surrounded by wreckage, she was dangerous. Suddenly, a warning klaxon blared from his scanner. He glanced at the screen, his blood running cold. Multiple contacts approaching fast, Prilorian warships. "They're here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They're coming for you." She smirked, a cold, predatory expression that sent a shiver down his spine. "Good," she said. "Let them come." Then she collapsed. The holographic display flickered, each line of communication to the Prilorian Empire now dead, a crimson off line emblazoned beside each. Thomas stared, the dull light reflecting in his weary eyes. "That's it then," he muttered, more to himself than to Selene, who stood silently beside him. "Officially, we're done talking." "They do not understand," Selene said softly, her voice carrying a faint, almost musical quality. "They don't want to understand," Thomas corrected, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's more than just different languages, Selene. They're communication signals. They have these subtle inflections based on social rank. Our translation algorithms just flatten them out. We're missing half the conversation because we don't even realize there is a hierarchy baked into every syllable." He turned back to the console, frustration etched on his face. Damn it all. He hit his fist on the table, then immediately regretted it, wincing at the pain. There has to be something in these texts. He gestured towards the stacks of ancient Prilorian tablets and translated schematics that cluttered the room. Something that can help us understand them better. Selene watched him, her expression a complex mix of concern and drive. "You are dedicated, Thomas Harris. I have not seen such commitment since." Well, since my tutor attempted to explain the intricacies of interdimensional calculus to me. She paused, a wistful look in her eyes. When I was a child on Prylos, my grandmother used to tell me stories of other cultures. She spoke of humans, of your history and mythology. She believed that honoring the ancestors, even those of other species, brought wisdom and understanding. A flicker of memory crossed Seleni's face. The grand hall of Prylos shimmered with iridescent light. Young Selene, no older than 6 in human terms, sat cross-legged before her grandmother, a woman whose face was etched with the wisdom of centuries. Holographic images danced in the air, depicting scenes of ancient Earth. Greek gods battling titans, Roman legions marching across Europe, Renaissance artists painting masterpieces. "Tell me again about the humans, grandmother," Selene pleaded, her voice filled with childlike wonder. "Ah, the humans," her grandmother chuckled, her voice a warm, comforting rumble. "A species of fierce contradictions. They are capable of great love and terrible cruelty, of breathtaking innovation and devastating destruction. But above all, they are resilient. They have faced countless challenges and emerged stronger each time. Their stories are filled with heroes and villains, of triumphs and tragedies. They are a species worth understanding, Selene. For in their history we can see reflections of our own." The memory faded, leaving Selene with a renewed sense of purpose. But that purpose was about to be challenged. Across the galaxy, on the Prylorian homeworld, High General Varkos addressed a massive rally of soldiers and citizens. His voice, amplified by powerful speakers, boomed with righteous fury. "For too long we have tolerated the weakness of our council. For too long we have allowed sentimentality to cloud our judgment. Humanity has struck first. They have attacked us, and now they would have us believe they are innocent. They offer platitudes and empty promises while they prepare for further aggression." On a smaller screen, Varkos's image flickered inside Thomas's lab. "Selene," Varkos spat, his voice dripping with scorn. "A traitor to her own people. She consorts with the enemy, spreading their lies and undermining our determination. She is a disgrace to the Prylorian Empire." Varkos paused, letting his whine sink in. "I say enough is enough. I issue this ultimatum to humanity. Surrender all advanced technology, open your borders to Prylorian inspection, and offer reparations for the unprovoked attack or face annihilation. You have 1 week to comply." Thomas stared at the screen, his face grim. "Annihilation? That's not just rhetoric, is it?" "No," Selene replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Varkos. He is not a patient being." Thomas returned to the ancient texts, poring over the symbols and diagrams with renewed intensity. Hours blurred into a relentless search. Finally, his fingers traced a faint line on one of the tablets, a line almost invisible to the naked eye. "Here," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse with excitement. "A hidden passage, a failsafe mechanism, a failsafe." Selene asked, her eyes widening. "What kind?" "I don't know yet," Thomas admitted, "but it's old, very old, older than anything we've seen so far, and it requires knowledge of Prylorian social rank inflections to operate." "Damn it, we're back to that." An idea sparked in his mind. "Wait a minute." He rushed to a nearby workbench, grabbing wires, circuits, and focusing crystals. "If I can build a device, something that can amplify and translate those subtle inflections, then maybe we can understand the intricacies of their social hierarchy. Maybe we can bypass Varkos and reach someone who will listen to reason." Days turned into a blur of feverish activity. Thomas, fueled by caffeine and desperation, worked tirelessly, his hands moving with a speed and precision that belied his age. Selene assisted where she could, translating technical jargon and offering insights into Prylorian culture. Finally, the device was complete, a complex array of sensors, amplifiers, and holographic projectors. "All right," Thomas said, his voice trembling slightly as he activated the device. "Let's see if this thing actually works." The device hummed to life, bathing the room in a soft, ethereal glow. Thomas adjusted the settings, focusing on the Prilorian communication channels. He tuned into a secure frequency, one used by the Prilorian Council. Static crackled, then a voice, hesitant but clear, emerged from the device. "This is Counselor Lyra. Who is this? How did you bypass our security protocols?" "Counselor Lyra," Selene said, stepping forward. "It is I, Selene. I am contacting you with vital information regarding High General Varkos." A long pause. "Selene, I thought you were." "I am alive, Counselor," Selene interrupted, "and I need your help. Varkos is planning an attack on Earth. He is manipulating the truth to incite war. You must stop him." Lyra sighed, her holographic image flickering with concern. "I am sympathetic to your cause, Selene, but my position is precarious. Varkos has gained considerable power. I cannot openly oppose him without risking my own life." "Then meet with me in secret," Selene urged. "I can explain everything. I can show you the evidence." Lyra hesitated. "Very well, I will meet you, but be warned, Selene. Varkos is not a fool. He will be watching. This could be a trap." Thomas and Selene exchanged a look, the weight of the decision heavy in the air. "We have no choice," Thomas said grimly. "We have to try." The clandestine meeting took place in a hidden location on a neutral space station. Selene and Thomas waited anxiously in a dimly lit room, the air thick with tension. Finally, the door hissed open, and Counselor Lyra entered, her face etched with worry. "Thank you for coming, Counselor," Selene said, stepping forward to greet her. Before Lyra could respond, a volley of blaster fire erupted from the doorway. Lyra cried out, clutching her chest as she collapsed to the ground. Selene and Thomas dove for cover as more shots ripped through the room. "Varkos!" Selene screamed, her voice filled with rage and despair. Lyra, her voice weak and fading, reached out to Selene. "He knew. Trap." With a final shudder, Counselor Lyra went still, the hope for peace dying with her. On Prylos, Varkos stood before the assembled fleet, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "The time for diplomacy is over," he roared. "The council is dissolved. I am now in command. Prepare for immediate attack. Earth will burn." Back in the hidden lab, Selene stared at the lifeless image of Lyra, her face a mask of grief and anger. "He's won," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He seized control of the fleet. He's going to destroy Earth." Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze firm. "Not if we can help it. There's still the failsafe." Selene shook her head. "It will take too long to activate. Even if we succeed, it could destabilize the entire empire. It could ignite a civil war." "It's our only chance," Thomas insisted. "We have to try." Selene closed her eyes, wrestling with the enormity of the decision. Finally, she opened them, her gaze resolute. "Then we will do it, but first, I must speak to my people." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, confused. "I must expose Varkos' treachery," Selene said, her voice filled with perseverance. "I must tell them the truth about his lies and his thirst for power. I must warn them about the failsafe and the consequences of his actions. Even if it ignites a civil war, it is better than allowing him to destroy Earth and plunge the galaxy into darkness." Thomas nodded, his heart swelling with admiration for her courage. "Then let's do it. I'll use the device to ensure your message is properly understood by all Prilorian social ranks. No matter how subtle the inflection, they will hear your truth." Selene stepped before the holographic projector, her face pale but determined. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice resonating with power and conviction. "People of Prylos, I am Selene, daughter of." As her message was broadcast across the galaxy, Varkos, his face contorted with fury, smacked his head on the command console. "Silence her," he roared. "Find her, capture her, and order all ships, to immediately attack Earth." Attack Earth. The order echoed across the Prilorian network, a thunderclap of aggression that shattered the uneasy calm. On Prylos, the message played on public screens, in marketplaces, and even within homes. Faces, both Prilorian and those of other subjugated species, contorted in confusion, then fear. Riots erupted in several districts as the locations sunk in. Selene was siding with the humans. In the vanguard of Varkos's fleet, a handful of Prilorian ships broke formation, their transponders flashing defiant signals. "We will not fire on civilians." One broadcast. This is not the Prylos' way, but their rebellion was short-lived. Cruisers loyal to Varkos unleashed a torrent of plasma fire, vaporizing the dissenting vessels in blinding flashes. The message was clear: obedience or annihilation. The main fleet surged towards Earth. The assault was overwhelming. Plasma bolts slammed into Earth's orbital defense platforms, vaporizing metal and rock. Kinetic rounds, accelerated to near light speed, punched through shield arrays with contemptuous ease. From the surface, cities became infernos, their skylines dissolving into swirling clouds of fire and ash. The air thrummed with the relentless percussion of explosions. Earth's defense forces, hopelessly outgunned, resorted to desperate measures. Fighters darted through the debris fields, using asteroids as cover. Ground troops, armed with railguns and salvaged Prilorian tech, ambushed landing parties in the ruins of once great cities. They were gnats against a titan, but they fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Deep within the Cheyenne Mountain complex, Thomas stared at the holographic projection of Prylos, his brow furrowed. Selene, pacing anxiously beside him, gnawed at a claw. "It doesn't make sense," he muttered, scrolling through lines of ancient Prilorian text. This failsafe, it's not a weapon." "What do you mean?" Selene asked, her voice tight with apprehension. Thomas pointed to a specific passage, the symbols glowing with an eerie light. "This isn't a schematic for planetary destruction. It's an energy dampener, planet-wide." Selene gasped, her mandibles clicking in distress. "A dampener, but that would cripple all technology, including life support." Thomas nodded grimly. "It was designed to prevent planetary annihilation during a civil war, to make technology useless so no one could use super weapons." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "A desperate measure for a desperate time." Selene turned away, her small frame trembling. "My people, they would die." Suddenly, a comm signal blared through the room. It was faint, distorted, but undeniably Prilorian. "Selene, can you hear us? This is Lyra's research team. We need asylum, Varkos. He knows we oppose him." "What is it?" Selene asked, her voice strained. "Varkos, he's using experimental weapons, gravitic destabilizers. They could shatter Earth's magnetosphere." The revelation hung heavy in the air. The failsafe or the destruction of Earth, an impossible choice. Thomas smacked his palm on the console. "There has to be another way." He began to pace, muttering to himself, then stopped, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. What if we could limit the effect, amplify the dampener's signal but focus it, disrupt his weapons without crippling Prylos? Selene looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. Could it work? "It's a long shot," Thomas admitted, "but we'd need baridium, a rare mineral, only found in significant quantities in the Kuiper Belt, too dangerous to mine normally." Selene stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Then we go ourselves." As Thomas and Selene prepared for their perilous journey, Varkos, his face a mask of cold fury, stood on the bridge of his flagship. "Launch the gravity bomb," he commanded. "Let Earth be a lesson to all who defy the Prilorian Empire." The gravity bomb, a sphere of swirling dark energy, detached from the ship and accelerated towards Earth, bending space around it. It would bypass all defenses, crushing the planet with its immense gravitational force. On Prylos, Varkos turned his attention to the remaining pockets of resistance. "Execute all those who support Selene," he snarled, "starting with her family." Light years away, aboard their small transport ship, Selene received a garbled message, her face draining of color. They're going to kill my family." The transmission cut out, leaving only static and the cold dread of the unknown. Selene stared at the calm screen, the crimson words of the Prylos High Court searing themselves into her memory. Execution sanctioned. Treason confirmed. Sentence imminent. Her breath hitched, a strangled sob escaping her lips. The screen went dark, leaving her bathed in the cold, sterile light of the mining vessel. She crumpled, a Prylorian princess reduced to a trembling heap on the metal floor. Grief clawed at her throat, choking off any sound. Guilt, sharp and relentless, pierced her heart. My family, because of me. Thomas knelt beside her, his hand hovering awkwardly. Selene, she recoiled, her eyes wide with pain. Get away from me. Each word cracked as she spoke. We have to keep going, Thomas said, his voice low but firm. Earth, it needs that mineral you promised. Selene pushed herself up, her face streaked with tears. Earth, my family is about to die. How can you even think about Earth right now? Thomas's lips pursed. Because if we don't get that mineral, billions of people will die. Your family wouldn't want that. The asteroid belt loomed ahead, a chaotic jumble of rock and ice. Gravitational sensors pinged erratically, warning of unpredictable anomalies. Debris fields, dense as swarms of insects, threatened to tear the ship apart. Brace yourself, Thomas barked, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. This is going to get rough. The ship lurched violently as they entered the belt, alarms blaring a cacophony of warnings. Selene squeezed the armrests, her nucleus tightening. Memories flashed through her mind. Her mother's warm smile, her father's steady hand, her siblings' laughter echoing through the palace gardens. Were those the last times I would see them? Each asteroid they dodged felt like another dagger twisting in her heart. A distorted signal crackled over the comms. Unidentified vessel, this is Prylorian mining vessel Krell. State your intentions. Thomas hesitated. We're prospectors, looking for a rare mineral deposit. A gruff voice responded. Prospectors don't fly ships like that. We know a ghost runner when we see one. We need passage to Earth. Supplies are running low, or we will take what we want. Thomas glanced at Selene. We can't trust them. We have no choice, Selene said, her voice flat. Information for passage, that is the Prylorian way. The Krell was a hulking monstrosity, scarred and battered from years of hard labor. Its crew, a motley collection of hardened miners, eyed them with suspicion. After a tense exchange, the Krell's captain, a hulking Prylorian with a cybernetic eye, revealed what he knew. The richest deposit is on asteroid B92, heavily guarded, Varkos's private mining operation. Meanwhile, on Prylos, Lyra's resistance cell prepared their desperate gamble. A small team armed with stolen disruptors infiltrated the prison complex. Their target, Selene's family, but Varkos was ready. He had anticipated their move. The ambush was swift and brutal. Disruptor fire ripped through the corridors, but Varkos's guards were heavily armored. Lyra's team fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. One by one, they fell. Selene's parents and siblings were dragged from their cells, their faces etched with fear and despair. They were paraded through the streets, publicly humiliated and imprisoned in the central plaza. Then, Varkos's message blared across every comm channel in the sector. A holographic image flickered to life, showing Selene's family cowering before a sneering Varkos. Selene, Varkos's voice boomed, tinged with malice. Return to Prylos, surrender yourself and your family will be spared. Refuse and they will suffer the consequences. Thomas watched the broadcast, his stomach twisting into knots. He knew what he had to do. He cut the transmission, burying the message deep within the ship's memory banks. Selene couldn't see this. Not now. On Earth, scientists worked frantically, analyzing the data streaming in from the gravity bomb. The distortion field is localized, but it's growing exponentially, one scientist reported. It's destabilizing the planet's core. We're running out of time, another added. We need a countermeasure, and we need it now. A grizzled physicist stepped forward. I have a proposal. A long shot, but it's all we've got. Detonate a series of EMP charges at strategic points around the core. It might disrupt the field, but the risk of catastrophic failure is high. Thomas and Selene reached asteroid B92. It was a fortress, dripping with gun emplacements and patrolled by heavily armed guards. "This is it," Thomas said, his voice grim. "The mineral is down there." "How do we get in?" Selene asked, her eyes scanning the defenses. Thomas activated a holographic display outlining the asteroid's layout. "We use the Krell's stealth systems. We slip in under their radar, disable the security grid, and grab the mineral. Simple." As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the mining facility, Selene stumbled upon a hidden file, Varkos's broadcast. Her family's faces, etched with terror, stared back at her. Rage surged through her, eclipsing her grief. "You knew," she screamed, turning on Thomas, her eyes blazing with fury. "You knew about my family and you hid it from me." Thomas stepped back, his face pale. "I was trying to protect you and Earth." "Protect me?" Selene spat. "By lying to me, by manipulating me. You used my pain for your own selfish ends." "This isn't about me," Thomas pleaded. "It's about saving billions of lives." "And what about my family's lives?" Selene retorted, her voice trembling with fury. "Do they not matter?" They reached the mineral deposit. Mountains of the shimmering crystals lay before them, bathed in the harsh glare of the facility lights. The extraction was swift and efficient, but as they prepared to leave, alarms blared. They had been detected. "We have company," Thomas yelled, piloting the mining vessel through the narrow corridors, dodging laser fire. Selene stared out at the vast expanse of space, her mind racing. She couldn't stay here, not anymore. Her family needed her. "I have to go back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "What?" Thomas exclaimed, struggling to maintain control of the ship. "You can't be serious." "My family is more important than anything," Selene replied, her voice resolute. Thomas reached for her, but Selene was too quick. She slammed her fist into his chest, sending him sprawling against the console. Prylorian strength unleashed. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she said, her eyes filled with tears. "But I have to do this." She ejected from the mining vessel in a stolen shuttle, setting a course for Prylos, leaving Thomas stranded, facing certain capture, leaving Earth to its fate. The gravity bomb continued its inexorable descent. The comm crackled, Thomas's voice a desperate plea lost in the static. Selene clenched her jaw, fingers flying across the shuttle's console, rerouting its trajectory with ruthless precision. Prylos beckoned, a swirling sapphire marble in the distance. Earth's survival, her family's freedom, everything hinged on this reckless gamble. On the asteroid, Thomas cursed, banging his hand against the console of his crippled ship. Smoke curled from a ruptured power conduit. Hopeless, he needed to move, and fast. His gaze fell on a battered mining drone, its chassis scarred from countless asteroid impacts. A long shot, but his only one. "All right, you rusty bucket," he muttered, grabbing a plasma torch. "Let's see if you've got one last flight in you." He knew it was suicide, but the thought of Selene facing Varkos alone spurred him on. Earth shuddered. Across the globe, seismographs spiked. Gravitational sensors screamed. The gravity bomb, buried deep beneath the Siberian tundra, was waking up. News reports flashed across every screen. Collapsing buildings, tidal waves, and a sky tinged with an unnatural, sickly green. Panic gripped the populace. In a secure bunker beneath Cheyenne Mountain, scientists worked feverishly, their faces illuminated by the glow of holographic displays. "EMP prepped for launch," a technician announced, his voice strained. "But sir," another interjected, "the Prylorian atmosphere. We don't know what it will do. It could backfire, fry our own systems." A senator smacked his head on the table. "We're talking about the survival of Earth. Political niceties be damned. Launch that EMP." Nearing Prylos, Selene activated the shuttle's comm system, her heart pounding. "Lyra, this is Selene. I'm here. I need your help." Silence. Then a distorted voice filled with static. "Selene, welcome home. We've been expecting you." It wasn't Lyra. It was Varkos. His image flickered onto the shuttle's main display, a predatory smile twisting his lips. Such a touching reunion. I've arranged a special welcome for you, niece. A chance to see your family. One last time. The shuttle's navigation system locked onto a new set of coordinates, a heavily guarded prison complex on the outskirts of Prilos Prime. Thomas wrestled with a corroded access panel on the mining drone. Sparks showered around him. "Come on, you piece of junk," he growled, "just a little more." The panel finally gave way, revealing a tangle of wires. He spliced them together, bypassing the damaged navigation system. He was flying blind, relying on instinct and a prayer. Then he saw it, tucked away in a dusty compartment. A hidden communication array. Old but potentially functional. He rerouted power to it, his fingers flying across the ancient interface. A coded message, a desperate plea, shot out into the void, aimed towards Earth. In the Oval Office, the President of the United States listened grimly to the decoded message. Harris, Prilos, gravity bomb, Selene, requesting assistance. The Joint Chiefs of Staff argued vehemently. "Sir, we have to focus on Earth. Sending a fleet to Prilos would divert resources we can't afford to lose." The President closed his eyes, the weight of the world pressing down on him. How long until the EMP is ready? Selene bypassed Varkos's blockade, her shuttle weaving through a gauntlet of patrol ships. Alarms blared, but she ignored them, her focus laser locked on the prison complex. She landed hard, the shuttle's landing gear groaning in protest. She burst out of the cockpit, drawing her plasma pistol. The prison loomed before her, a fortress of ferrocrete and steel. She moved like a wraith, scaling walls, disabling cameras, taking down guards with brutal efficiency. Her Prilorian strength and agility were unmatched. As Thomas's drone limped into Prilos' orbit, he managed to establish a fleeting, fractured connection to the remnants of the Earth fleet. "This is Harris, requesting assistance, Selene, prison complex." The signal died, swallowed by the void. Selene reached her family's cell. The door hissed open, empty. A cold wave of dread washed over her. Varkos stepped out of the shadows, his face a mask of triumph. "Did you really think it would be this easy, niece? You're not just a pawn, Selene. You're a symbol. Your capture will solidify my control over Prilos. The people need to see that even the mighty Selene can be broken." Plasma fire erupted. Selene fought with the ferocity of a cornered predator, but Varkos's forces were overwhelming. She dodged, weaved, and returned fire, but they were too many. Thomas, his face illuminated by the flickering lights of the drone's cockpit, wrestled with the controls. He had managed to pilot the drone closer to the surface, risking everything. "I'm sorry, Selene," he whispered, "but this is all I've got." He activated the drone's mining lasers, aiming them at a point just outside the prison walls. The ground buckled, sending up a shower of rock and debris, a chaotic diversion. Back on Earth, the countdown reached 0. "Imp device armed and ready," the technician announced. "Initiating launch sequence." Selene was disarmed, beaten, and dragged into the prison courtyard. Her family was forced to watch as Varkos publicly humiliated her, stripping her of her dignity, her power, her hope. Then the drone was hit. An explosion rocked the cockpit, throwing Thomas against the console. Alarms blared. The screen went black. Silence. Selene, defeated and imprisoned, stared defiantly at Varkos. Above her, the sky shimmered with an unnatural energy. On Earth, the EMP detonated, unleashing its devastating power. Thomas was stranded in Prilos' atmosphere, his fate unknown. Selene stared at the holoscreen, her face a mask of controlled fury. Varkos' image loomed large, his voice booming with manufactured sincerity. "Selene, daughter of Prilos, has betrayed her people. She conspired with the human Harris to unleash a weapon of unimaginable destruction upon our world. Her actions are a stain upon her lineage, a testament to the corrupting influence of alien ideologies." The broadcast showed distorted images of the mining drone wreckage, interspersed with fabricated evidence supposedly linking Selene to the attack. The intention was clear: crush any remaining support for the resistance, paint Selene as a pariah. Inside her cell, the air tasted of recycled despair. A jolt. Thomas gasped, his eyes snapping open to a world of twisted metal and flickering emergency lights. The mining drone was a mangled wreck, its once gleaming hull ripped open like a discarded husk. Pain throbbed in his leg, a sharp, insistent reminder of his near-death experience. He coughed, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood and ozone. He had to move, scavenging. That was the only thing he could do. He reached into his pack, pulling out a multi-tool. Each movement sent jolts of pain through his body. On Earth, darkness reigned. Chicago's skyline, usually a vibrant tapestry of light, was a jagged silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. Emergency generators sputtered and died. Hospitals struggled to maintain life support. The electromagnetic pulse had crippled the power grid, plunging the planet into chaos. Reports trickled in. Communication failures, transportation gridlocks, widespread panic. Humanity, so reliant on its technology, was suddenly vulnerable. Thomas swore under his breath, his fingers numb with cold. He crawled through the wreckage, his archaeologist's eye now focused on the pragmatic task of survival. A flicker of hope. Wedged between two crushed consoles, he spotted it, a functional emergency beacon. Small, battered, but alive. He grabbed it, his heart pounding with a surge of adrenaline. But the signal was weak, pitifully weak. It wouldn't reach Earth on its own. In the prison, Selene's mind raced. She sat rigidly, listening intently to the guard's boasts about Varkos's plans for a public execution. "It'll be glorious," the guard sneered, a wiry Prylorian with eyes like chips of obsidian. "The entire planet will witness your demise." Selene forced a sigh, feigning despair. "Such a waste," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "All this security, for one insignificant prisoner. Tell me, what are the chances someone like me could even escape this fortress?" The guard puffed out his chest. "Escape? Impossible. We have multiple layers of laser grids, pressure sensors, and neural inhibitors, not to mention the drone patrols. No one gets out of here." He detailed the location of the armory, its security protocols, and the patrol routes of the drones. Selene filed it all away, each piece of information a potential weapon. In a dimly lit war room beneath the Pentagon, Earth's military leaders huddled around a holographic projection of Prylos. General Ramirez, his face etched with fatigue, thumped his hand on the table. "We can't just abandon her. She's carrying vital information about the gravity bomb." Another officer, a sharp-faced woman named Colonel Harris, countered. "A rescue mission is suicide, General. The Prylorians control the space around the planet. Any ship we send will be shot down before it even enters the atmosphere. And what about the rest of Earth? We can't risk further resources on a long shot." The ethical implications hung heavy in the air. One life versus the survival of billions. Thomas squinted at the horizon, his gaze sweeping across the desolate landscape. There. A subtle anomaly, a break in the jagged peaks. An ancient Prylorian structure half buried in the sand, its purpose long forgotten. But Thomas knew. The placement of the stones, the faint energy signature. It was a resonance chamber designed to amplify energy, if he could interface the beacon with that structure. Lyra, hidden deep within the Resistance's underground bunker, stared at the datapad, her heart sinking. Varkos's propaganda was working. Hope was fading. Then a coded message flashed across the screen, a series of seemingly random characters. It was a whisper from the shadows, a sympathizer within Varkos's inner circle. Selene acting under duress. "Trust not what you see." A spark of defiance flickered in Lyra's eyes. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping sand against Thomas's face as he trudged across the Prylorian plains. The salvaged drone parts, strapped to his back, weighed him down, each step a victory against exhaustion and despair. The landscape was unforgiving, razor-sharp rocks, treacherous ravines, and the ever-present threat of the indigenous predators. Back in the prison, Selene stood before the assembled prisoners, Varkos beside her. The Prilorian leader gestured for Selene to speak. She stared out at the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces. Varkos smiled smugly. Selene took a deep breath. Varkos lies, she stated, before being quickly silenced by the guards. It was a small act, a whisper of truth in a sea of lies, but it rippled through the crowd, a flicker of recognition in their eyes. On Earth, in a makeshift lab powered by scavenged batteries, a team of scientists worked feverishly to restore communication capabilities. They bypassed damaged satellites, rerouted signals through ancient radio towers, piecing together a fragile network. Finally, a connection. Garbled, weak, but alive. Military channels were prioritized. Thomas reached the ancient structure, its massive stones looming like silent sentinels. He set down the drone parts, his hands trembling with fatigue. He began to work, his archaeological knowledge guiding him, his fingers tracing the alien symbols, seeking a point of connection. Lyra's resistance cell, armed with outdated weaponry and fueled by desperation, launched a diversionary attack on a nearby military outpost. Explosions rocked the night, drawing Varkos' forces away from the prison, creating a window of opportunity. Taking advantage of the chaos, Selene feigned a seizure, collapsing to the floor of her cell. The guards rushed to her side, their weapons lowered for a split second. It was all she needed. With a swift, brutal move, she disarmed them, her Prilorian strength amplified by years of training. She grabbed their weapons and sprinted down the corridor, heading for the hidden armory. A surge of power coursed through the ancient structure as Thomas connected the final wire. The emergency beacon pulsed with renewed energy, its signal amplified 1,000-fold. But the activation triggered something else, a low, guttural hum, followed by the activation of ancient defense systems. On the bridge of the Earth Fleet flagship, the Dauntless, a young communications officer shouted, "Sir, we've got a signal, a faint distress beacon from Prylos." Admiral Stevens, his face grim, leaned forward. "Confirm location." The officer worked furiously. "It's Dr. Harris, sir. He's alive." Then another alert flashed across the screen. "Sir, we're also detecting a high concentration of gravitational distortion. It's the gravity bomb core." Varkos, alerted to Selene's escape, roared with fury. "Lock down the prison, seal every exit, deploy the security drones. I want her captured, dead or alive." The prison transformed into a hunting ground, its corridors patrolled by lethal machines. Alarms blared as Thomas scrambled to evade the ancient drones. They were sleek, metallic predators, armed with energy weapons and programmed to kill. He ducked behind a crumbling pillar, his heart pounding in his chest. He had limited resources, his only weapons his wits and his knowledge of the ancient structure. Selene reached the armory, its door sealed by a laser grid. She raised her stolen weapon, a Prilorian pulse rifle, and fired. The beam sliced through the grid, creating a gaping hole. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the racks of weapons. She grabbed a pulse rifle, a plasma pistol, and a vibro knife. She was ready to fight. The Dauntless and its escorts accelerated towards Prylos, their engines burning bright against the darkness. Thomas battled ancient drones amidst the ruins of a forgotten civilization. Selene faced a prison teeming with enemy soldiers, ready to fight for her freedom and the future of her world. Open warfare had begun. Selene, adrenaline coursing through her veins, pressed herself against the cold, metallic wall. The rhythmic thud of boots echoed in the corridor of patrol. Elite guards, she knew, judging by the energy signatures she could detect even through the thick plasteel. Energy shields rippled with contained power, and the pulse rifles they carried hummed with lethal potential. She needed to move, and fast. Across the planet, in the makeshift lab he'd established within the ruins, Thomas hunched over the salvaged drone, his brow furrowed in concentration. Lines of code scrolled across his holographic display, a chaotic jumble of alien symbols. "Eureka," he muttered, more to himself than the AI assistant hovering nearby. The drones. They're programmed to protect the structure from physical intrusion, but their sonic dampeners are remarkably primitive. Specific frequencies. That's the key. Light years away, the Earth fleet ripped through the fabric of hyperspace, emerging into Prilorian territory. But instead of the expected open space, they were met with a wall of shimmering energy, a previously undetected orbital defense grid. Alarms blared on the bridge of the flagship Deadliest. "Report," Captain Eva Rostova barked. "Unknown energy signature detected. It's some kind of orbital defense system. Shields are holding, but..." Back in the prison, Selene, with the agility of a predator, darted into a maintenance tunnel barely wider than her shoulders. She knew this prison's layout better than Varkos himself. This was her home once, and she knew its secrets. The guards, confident in their superior firepower, continued their patrol, oblivious to the danger lurking beneath their feet. She was baiting them, leading them into a trap. Thomas, his hands flying across the console, reconfigured the salvaged sonic emitter. "All right, let's see if this works," he said, a hint of manic energy in his voice. He activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the chamber, escalating into a deafening shriek. Outside, the ancient drones began to convulse, their metallic bodies shuddering violently. The sonic frequencies were disrupting their programming, turning them against each other. The Daedalus attempted to bypass the orbital grid, but the energy barrier shifted and contorted, anticipating their every move. "They're adapting," Rostova said grimly. "It's like they know where we're going before we do." Then, a technician spoke up. "Captain, I'm detecting a cloaking field. The entire grid is protected by a sophisticated cloaking system." Selene emerged from the maintenance tunnel behind the patrol, her movements silent and deadly. 3 guards fell before they even knew what hit them, their energy shields useless against her expertly placed strikes. She moved with precision, each blow calculated to incapacitate, not kill. She needed information, and these guards were her ticket to it. She located a hidden communications hub, a small room tucked away behind a false wall. Inside, she intercepted a message, a chilling order from Varkos himself. "If my position is threatened, detonate the gravity bomb remotely. Burn this world to ash." Amidst the chaos of the malfunctioning drones, Thomas stumbled upon a hidden chamber. Inside, a complex control panel glowed with an eerie light, covered in intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with energy. "What is this place?" He murmured, his fingers tracing the alien glyphs. This wasn't just a prison. This was something far older, far more significant. Rostova, faced with the impenetrable grid, made a desperate decision. "Deploy stealth fighters," she ordered. "A small team. Their profiles are minimal, maybe they can slip through the cracks. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got." The stealth fighters, sleek and black, detached from the Daedalus, their engines humming with nearly unleashed power. They were gambling everything on their ability to evade detection. Selene, interrogating the surviving guard, learned the location of the remote detonation, override a secure vault beneath the prison's main reactor. But accessing it wouldn't be easy. Varkos's personal access code was required, and it was stored within the vault itself. A biometric lock, multiple layers of security, and a squad of Varkos's most loyal soldiers stood between her and her goal. Thomas, his mind racing, interfaced with the control panel. As the symbols lit up beneath his touch, the holographic display flickered to life, revealing schematics of the ancient structure. "It's a planetary defense system," he realized, his voice filled with awe. "Designed to counter gravity-based weapons, but it's ancient, inactive for millennia." The stealth fighters pierced the outer layers of the cloaking field, but their success was short-lived. Swarms of automated interceptors, sleek and deadly, emerged from the darkness, their weapons blazing. The sky erupted in a chaotic ballet of lasers and explosions. Selene fought her way through the prison, each step bringing her closer to the reactor vault. Security drones swarmed her, their energy weapons spitting bolts of searing plasma. Prylorian soldiers, alerted to her presence, converged on her position, their faces grim and determined. But Selene was relentless, her movements a blur of speed and precision. Thomas, his fingers flying across the control panel, rerouted power to the ancient structure. "It's going to be close," he said, his voice strained. "I can reconfigure it to counter the gravity bomb, but it'll require a massive power surge, one that could destabilize the planet's core." He was playing a dangerous game, risking everything to save them all. One of the stealth fighters, crippled by enemy fire, spiraled out of control, its pilot ejecting just moments before the craft slammed into a Prylorian military installation. The pilot, now stranded behind enemy lines, activated his emergency beacon, a desperate plea for rescue. Selene reached the vault door, a massive, reinforced barrier emblazoned with the insignia of the Prylorian Empire. A biometric lock scanned her, denying access. Behind her, a squad of Varkos's personal guard emerged, their faces hardened with fanaticism. Thomas thumped his hand on the activation rune. Energy crackled around him, the very air vibrating with power. A planetary-scale energy surge began to build, the ground trembling beneath his feet. The remaining stealth fighters, facing overwhelming odds, prepared for a suicide run. Their target, the grid's main power generator. They knew they wouldn't survive, but they were willing to sacrifice themselves to give the Deadliest a chance. Selene, unable to bypass the biometric lock, pulled a salvaged plasma grenade from her belt. "Forgive me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the din of battle. She armed the grenade and slammed it against the vault door. The explosion that followed was deafening, the shockwave throwing her back against the wall. She had breached the vault, but she had also likely triggered a reactor meltdown. Selene burst into the vault, the air thick with the hum of failing gravity fields. Varko stood before a console, his fingers poised above a series of glowing runes. The remote detonation device. His eyes, cold and devoid of remorse, flickered towards her. "Too late, little queen," he sneered. "Your reign ends here with the annihilation of this world." Below, deep within the structure, Thomas traced the fading glyphs on a crumbling wall. A surge of intuition, born from years spent deciphering dead languages, flooded his mind. He understood. This wasn't a weapon, it was a key. The structure, the planet itself, was designed for something else entirely. He scrambled to a central chamber, its walls shimmering with dormant energy conduits. This was a planetary shield, designed to protect against celestial impacts, or gravity bombs. Above, the Earth fleet, battered and bruised by the Prylorian orbital grid, prepared for a final stand. Captain Eva Rostova, her face grim but resolute, addressed her crew. "They want a war. We'll give them one they won't forget, but we will not fire first." The order to stand down was already forming on her lips. "It's never too late to do the right thing, Varkos," Selene said, her voice resonating with an authority that belied her youthful appearance. She lunged, not to kill, but to disarm. A swift series of blows, guided by instinct and training, disabled the remote detonation device. Sparks flew and the humming ceased. Thomas, ignoring the tremors that shook the ancient structure, rerouted the energy flow. He channeled the surging power through the dormant conduits, overriding the detonation sequence. The planet groaned, the air crackling with raw energy. Then, with a blinding flash, a shimmering shield enveloped the planet, deflecting the gravity bomb's destructive force. The bomb was neutralized, but the planet shuddered, the strain on the ancient structure immense, and the ground beneath Thomas cracked. Watching the impossible unfold, Rostova gave the order. "All ships disengage. That's a planetary shield. Fall back, fall back." Lives were saved. Varkos, defeated but defiant, tried to flee. Selene intercepted him, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. "You can face justice for your crimes, Varkos, or you can die here, consumed by the very destruction you sought to unleash." She offered him her hand. Below, the readings on Thomas's archaic equipment flashed ominous warnings. "Damn it," he muttered, "the core is destabilizing. Without immediate intervention, this whole place is going to melt down." He located a series of control nodes humming with latent energy. It would take time, precision, and he glanced at the crumbling exit. Probably be a one-way trip. Seleni's voice, amplified across the planet, cut through the tension. "People of the Prilorian Empire, I am Selene. Varkos has betrayed us all. He sought to destroy this planet, to plunge us into eternal war. He will be brought to justice. I call upon you now, lay down your arms. Let us begin to heal the wounds of our past and build a future of peace." The Earth Fleet, receiving Selene's broadcast, transmitted a message of their own. "To the Prilorian Empire, we offer our condolences for the treachery you have suffered. We extend our hand in friendship and offer to begin negotiations for a peaceful resolution." Varkos, his rebellion crushed, was taken into custody by Prilorian guards. A new era was dawning. Thomas contacted Selene. "I've managed to stabilize the core, but I need to stay here to keep it that way. It's going to take time." He paused. "You have a chance to bring real peace to your people, Selene. Don't waste it." Selene arrived at the control center, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I promise you, Thomas, I will return. I will bring help. Just wait for me." As Selene ascended to the throne, crowned as the leader of a united Prilorian empire, she vowed to dedicate her reign to peace and cooperation with humanity. A new chapter in galactic history had begun. Alone in the ancient structure, Thomas felt a presence, a whisper in the hum of the machines. He saw them then, the ancient creators of the shield, their forms shimmering and ethereal. They showed him visions of countless worlds saved, of civilizations flourishing, and they showed him something else, the boundless capacity for compassion that resided within the human heart. Years later, a joint human Prilorian research initiative was established on the planet. Scientists from both species worked side by side, studying the ancient technology and fostering understanding between their cultures. Thomas, still tending to the planet's core, watched them with a quiet smile. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that this was only the beginning. A new era of peace and cooperation had